Moving on. Top fan Dave Olson says, so Elon Musk and Yasaku Maezawa are going to send a spaceship around the moon in 5 years or so. I thought it was less, actually. And instead of hard-headed, taciturn engineers and fighter jocks, they want to fill the ship with artistic types like filmmakers and philosophers. They'd probably like to have a married couple as well. Hint, hint. Let me see if there is yeah, I want to tie these together. I'm trying to see if there's any First Man related questions. So let me take that that Elon Musk thing and let me tie it into Martin Archer's question here, which is, instead of Gosling, who would you have cast as Armstrong? Anyone in movie or TV history? As Buzz, I'd have a 40-year-old John Voight as Buzz and a dialed-back Steve McQueen as Buzz. So I'm assuming John Voight as Neil. That's a fun question. I kind of think if you're going to cast Neil Armstrong, you probably want to go with Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was in The Spirit of St. Louis and played Charles Lindbergh. I forget how old Lindbergh was when he flew the Atlantic, but I don't think he was over 27 or something like that. And Stewart was mid-40s when he played the role, but he wanted to play it really badly. And he didn't. He played it very well. And Jimmy Stewart carries that essential sort of innocence about him. I want to talk about First Man in some detail here. And try to get Dave Wilson's question in there too. Because First Man, and as if you haven't seen my right angle on it, I did see it. I saw it over the weekend, but I paid for Venom, and then I just went into First Man. Eric Blake says Ryan Gosling is perfectly cast. He is perfectly cast. Ryan Gosling could have been a tremendous Neil Armstrong. He just wasn't. He wasn't a tremendous Neil Armstrong, and the reasons he wasn't, I'll get to in a minute. So the way I can stitch these two questions together is I can talk about First Man, but I can also talk about artists and filmmakers in space and so on. The most important thing I can say about First Man is, needless to say, everybody who knows anything about the show knows that Neil Armstrong's my lifelong idol and worshipped him as the pinnacle of everything I wanted to be ever since I watched him get off the limb when I was 10 years old. So I thought, okay, I'll go watch First Man because I have to see the story. There's no way I couldn't go to First Man and see the story. And I thought, it's going to be filled with all of this anti-American stuff, but at least I get a chance to get to know Neil. And as it turns out, it was the exact opposite. There was not any anti-American stuff in the movie. The flag raising was not there, but as I realized after seeing the movie, it didn't really belong there because I had thought, like everybody else, that in the movie he's going to land on the moon and Neil and Buzz are going to walk around and they cut the flag raising out because of just plain sheer nastiness. And I suspect there's a lot of that in there. I'm sure the idea of showing them raising the American flag was galling to them. But when they get to the moon, the experience is so sparse. It's so emotionally sterile, and it's so internal. It's so internal in Neil's head that I think if you'd put it in there, it wouldn't have made any sense or worked because you don't see them do anything on the moon. They don't do anything. Buzz and Neil don't do anything on the moon. Neil stands at the edge of a crater and cries, which I don't believe actually happened. Yes, I understand, Dave, about me being on the flight. I'm not sure I want to go on a flight with 12 other artists. If I'm going to go to the moon, the last thing I want to do is bring Los Angeles with me. So let's talk about this whole artistic thing and so on. When I came out of the movie, first thing I said to Natasha was, I just didn't like Neil Armstrong at all. I didn't like him. And yes, you have permission to go see First Man, Merlin. You just can't pay for it. You have to go pay for something else. Pay for something and then go in and watch First Man. And then everybody's happy. Or unhappy, as the case may be. I didn't like him. And I didn't like him because the way he's portrayed in the movie and the way he's written is not that he had the courage and the willpower to control his emotions so much as he seemed to be just stuffing things, like he was on the edge of snapping and stuffing things, and that instead of mastery and stoicism, what we saw was just kind of a repressive kind of a faint kind of cowardice, really. And I didn't like him, and there's not much in the movie for you to like about him. And this is the thing that is so illuminating about this movie. A lot of people on the left are saying it's Oscar gold, and it's like, I mean, Ryan Gosling is a fantastically good actor, and he gives a great performance in this movie. He really does. It's just not Neil Armstrong. And the reason it's not Neil Armstrong is particularly interesting to me. So I talk about this in the Right Angle Show, so I don't want to keep repeating myself. So I'll just let me get that read and say I've said some of this before. But here's the stuff for me. When the movie opened, I'm not going to give you spoiler alerts. Okay, spoiler alert. Ready? They actually make it to the moon and come back safely. Now, giving it away, it's like Luke's father. But it starts with him on the X-15 flight, goes right into action, which is smart. And I know all of this stuff like the back of my hand. But there was something immediately that I was not expecting, and that is that, you see the X-15, and the X-15 looks like a missile, and the B-52s looks like it's made out of granite, rock solid, and off they go into the stratosphere and stuff. But you're in the X-15, and you're still on the wing, and everything is just shaking, and they overshook the movie by 2 orders of magnitude. But you can see the fairing, that's holding the thing on. You can see it kind of flexing, and it's not a smooth ride, and it's not fun. And you can hear the metal creaking, and throughout the entire film, everywhere, in Gemini mission, in the command module, on the LEM, you constantly get the sense that this machine is about to break. And that was not anything I'd ever considered before, but I loved it. Now, I started in gliders, and I flew mostly carbon fiber gliders, and I liked them very much. And once or twice I flew in metal gliders, Schweitzers. And when you'd pull a more than a G on those things, you could hear the wings just oil can. It's unsettling. And this whole thing was doing that. They just looked like they were just about to fall apart, and they were. So the Gemini launch, again, is overdone. The whole thing's overdone. Overdone dark, overdone shaky, overdone stylistically, way overdone. But there are moments there where it was actually pretty cool, and gave me some insight into the experience, but nothing into Neil. So here's the problem that I noticed right away. Starts out with Neil flying the X-15, and he gets her up to 200,000 feet, comes back into re-enter, and he bounces off the atmosphere. And now he's got to get this thing back down and under control, and so on. And it's the first of many times where they put the camera into a paint shaker, turn on the paint shaker, and then go for a big close-up of Neil's eyes and big close-up of the instruments, which are unreadable blurs, and then the paint shaker is showing all of these things, and here's the problem. You never see Neil Armstrong master of the situation. You see that maybe he's the only guy who hasn't passed out, or maybe he's the only guy that hasn't gone screaming off into the night like the rest of the Hollywood crowd. But you never get the sense that he is willing himself to be in control over this. You never get the sense that that he's just better than the emergencies that he encountered. All you get is a sense that he's terrified, but he keeps his terror under control. Stuffs it the same way he stuffs his relationship with his wife. The whole movie is predicated around the loss of his daughter. I saw an interview with Neil on 60 Minutes, and they asked him about his daughter, and he's 85 or something when they shot that thing, or 80, late 70s, something like that. And he talks about his daughter who died at 2 years old back in 61, something like that. And 80-year-old Neil's practically crying on 60 Minutes. But he's not talking about, he's talking about, I think it affected my work, and he's about to break down and cry. The problem is that they make that entire thing the subject of it's the spine of the story. Neil's entire career as an astronaut orbits around, see what I did there? Orbits around the death of this little girl and constantly having flashbacks to her and seeing her and stuff. And this is why the movie's an utter failure artistically. Because I have no doubt, none, that losing his daughter at age 2 to brain cancer just put a wound on him that he never got over. But that's not what Neil Armstrong's life was about. Neil Armstrong didn't live his life thinking about his daughter. And they made it this way in the movie. And the reason they made it this way in the movie is because they had to bring so much family stuff into this movie. And now we start to get into the politically correct stuff that you can actually start to deconstruct. So really, while the film has got some interesting action sequences and a great deal of shaking, the movie is about his relationship with his family and his wife. And in that particular role, Neil Armstrong is maybe not the first man in the world. He's maybe not the best guy in the world in terms of being a father or a husband. And that's a gigantic artistic error, and it's a historical slander. And Neil Armstrong wasn't selected to go to... Neil Armstrong wasn't the first man because he was best at stuffing emotions away. Neil Armstrong was the first man because he had the ability to outthink life-threatening situations in real time. He simply kept his head. He kept his head in the most, and again, some of the movies are very good. When you see Gemini 8 spinning as fast as it does, it's just terrifying. So you get a movie about a guy who's repressed and can't communicate with his wife and won't talk to his kids and broods about his dead daughter, which is exactly what you would get if you made a movie about a film director. That's pretty much it. If you made a movie about a film director or a writer or an actor, like Birdman or something like this, is exactly what you get. You get this emotional kind of inner conflict, and I'm going to put on this tough exterior, but deep inside I'm bleeding and wounded and blah, 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 blah. And it's just a lie. And it's a lie, I suppose, on some part for the box office, I suppose on some part to make it tolerable as a date movie, but there are a lot of people you can tell stories about dysfunctional marriage about, but if you tell the Neil Armstrong story as a story of a dysfunctional marriage and a man who can't communicate because he's emotionally unavailable, then you no longer have any reason whatsoever to tell the story of Neil Armstrong, because it's not Neil Armstrong's story. Neil Armstrong's story is much bigger than that. Gosling, it's not Gosling's fault. He's a good actor. He got it from the direction and the script, but he's a robot, and and you just don't like him. He's not a happy guy. He's not a fun guy. He doesn't smile. he's so standoffish that you just really don't like him. And this is the antithesis of Neil Armstrong by every account. Everybody who ever talked to him, everybody who ever worked with him, said he was so friendly, so open, and again and again and again and again and again, the thing he was vocal about, loquacious about, was that he had very little to do with any of this stuff. That Neil Armstrong would go everywhere all the time and say to people, there were 400,000 people that put a man on the moon, put an American on the moon, and I'm one of them. I'm one of the 400,000. I'm not any more important than the rest of them, and couldn't have gotten there without any of the rest of them. And I had mentioned before, when I was all lit up about the flag waving thing a couple weeks ago on Stratosphere Lounge, I'd mentioned before the uniqueness of the Apollo 11 patch in that it's the only mission patch, I think, that doesn't have the crew members' names on it. But what I didn't know until earlier today, doing some follow-up, I won't even call it research, just, grazing. What I didn't know was that the mission commander has 51% of the vote on the particular mission patch. And it was Armstrong who absolutely insisted that we would not put the names of the astronauts on that patch, which is why the Apollo 11 patch is unlike any other mission patch. It's just magnificent. And I didn't know that Neil Armstrong was in the loop on that decision, but basically what I'm hearing now is that not only was in the loop, he insisted on it. He insisted on their names not being on that patch because it was about a bunch of people. And Eric Blake is got some interesting points to make. So you just don't like Neil Armstrong at all. I didn't like him, and that was hard for me because I want to like him a lot because I do. I love him. I think he's the greatest man who ever lived. So they didn't capture any of Neil. They didn't capture any of his. He was always scared. He just was scared under control. And he was I never saw a moment ever, and I'm willing to make compromises as a storyteller, needless to say, but I never saw a moment where he went from being scared to being Neil Armstrong. Because everybody's scared, but I never saw the moment in Ryan Gosling's expression or in his eyes where he goes from being terrified to being Neil frickin' Armstrong. And since I never saw that, then the movie's not about him. The movie's about Hollywood. It's not even liberals. It's not like there's a left-wing message in here. It's at least not about left-wing politics. The movie becomes a story of a man and his wife and their relationship and their troubled relationship with the children, and I just don't care. And part of this is a male-female thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So to give you an idea, there's a scene where he's about ready to go to he's packing to go, and he doesn't want to go in and talk to his kids. And his wife gets hysterical and starts screaming and yelling at him and says, you've got to go in there and talk to your boys. And you realize, oh my God, this man with iron nerves is afraid of emotional commitment. He's afraid to go and talk to his boys. Now, this may have happened. I have no doubt it did happen this way because it was based on First Man, James Lifton, I think. And Neil had a lot to do with that book. So I'm not trying to say that didn't happen, but what I'm trying to say is that they made the movie about a guy who was too emotionally uptight to talk to his kids because he was about to go and fly on the moon. He was packing his stuff and wanted to get out of there because if this story tells anything about the truth, then I would want to get the hell out of this place too. Not only did he not get emotional support, I thought, from his wife. Certainly in the movie, when he's getting ready to go, he's packing to go down there for Apollo freaking 11. Instead of his wife supporting him, she's just plain bitching at him, just bitching and yelling at him and giving him grief and yelling and screaming at him and, making him feel bad. The guy's about to go to the moon, lady. Leave him alone. If you're not going to give him some support, then shut up. He's about to fly to the frickin' moon. And this is the part of the thing that I think mentioned a second ago about breaks down into male and female, because they've got this incredible speech, where the wife says, there are two boys in there. And they may be about to lose their father. And I instantly, I thought, well, boys lose their fathers every single day. And it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. But boys lose their fathers every single day. But they don't lose their fathers flying to the frickin' moon every single day. And that never entered the movie. It never entered the movie. He's just a guy who's afraid to talk to his kids. He's too repressed. He's going to the moon, lady. If you're not going to give the guy a sandwich and a kiss, then just get out of his way and stop making him miserable. He's got some things on his mind, And this is the big divide between the pink tribe and the gray tribe. The pink tribe made this movie, and they can't understand the gray tribe's. They can't understand the gray tribe's value set. All they see is a guy who's emotionally unavailable. Dave Big Booty said, what did Natasha think of the movie? Well, as it turns out, Natasha had the most profound thing to say about that, as usual. And I'm still thinking about it. We're coming out of the theater, and I said, I don't know, honey. I just didn't like him. I thought he was a robot. I thought he came off just kind of dead. And Natasha said, well, Billy, he has to be mostly dead. He's constantly going straight into the world of the dead. And you can't go in and out of the world of death that frequently if you have any kind of a nervous system. I thought, wow. Yeah, that's right. You can't be Neil Armstrong and be Ryan Gosling, or Bill Whittle for that matter. You can't. You cannot do the job with the emotional level of most people. You have to be able to have that sense of discipline. And that's why I love Neil Armstrong. I love him because he's all the things I'm not. Although, I have to say, reflexively, having had 3 engine failures in a single-engine airplane, all 3 of them exact same thing. Oh, God. All right. Let's get this thing on the ground. You're a glider pilot. Glide. Done this before. You put the plane down anywhere. You know what you're doing. And that was very Armstrongian of me, and that's why I don't want to give myself too short a shift here, because because there are elements about him that I modeled myself on, and that I've actually felt like I've managed to live up to. We never saw any of that. Some people had pointed out that they made Buzz into a jerk. Well, Buzz is a jerk. He is a jerk. He was and is a terrible person, like Bill Shatner. I've heard stories of people who asked Buzz. These are not fans. These are not people at an air show. Buzz was doing a tour of, like, it was, Johnson Space Flight Center, or it was Huntsville or something. He was going to a NASA facility, and they had gotten a picture that they wanted Buzz to sign for a charity for sick children or something. Really, NASA engineers are asking Buzz Aldrin to sign his name to something so that we can give it to this charity, and Buzz wouldn't do it unless he got paid. And everybody there is like, they go from, Neil Armstrong was worshipped because Neil Armstrong would not take credit for anything. And Buzz, on the other hand, had the 400,000 people who put those 2 guys on the moon. Neil's giving them all the credit. What Buzz is basically doing is saying, they don't mean anything. I'm the guy who landed on the moon. I'm the star. And when you hear stories like this, you think, Buzz, God damn it, you were selected by the country. It's a privilege and an honor. You owe this country. We owe you, yes, but you owe this country back. This is not something that you built by yourself. When you hear stories like that, it's just like, God damn it, Buzz. Really? But that's Buzz. And they picked Neil because Neil had not only nerves of steel, Neil was such a great engineer that he knew the nuts and bolts of that ship better than the people that built it. He just obsessively learned everything about that vehicle. And he designed the lunar landing simulator, which was a flying simulator, not a computer simulator, which nearly killed him. But didn't. And in fact, he goes up in this thing, the flying bedstead, and gets out of control. He punches out, ejects 100 feet above the ground, probably a fifth of a second before he's dead. And then Neil parachutes down through this fireball of his wreckage of the wreckage of this thing, and they pick him up and he goes to work. And they come in the morning and there's Neil doing the paperwork at his desk with his little clip-on tie and his short sleeve shirt with the pocket protector. That's astonishing. So Buzz is a jerk, and Bill Shatner's a jerk, and a lot of people are jerks. Patton was a jerk, and I want to get to that last thing in a minute. So please remind me about Patton and the right stuff and Apollo 13, because I'll wrap on this, I think, for the night. But it's okay. You can be a jerk if you deliver. And that's why when you have diva behavior from brilliant artists, well, diva comes from the opera, right? And you got one person in the world who can sing this way, and she acts like she's the only person who can sing this way. And it's horrible and annoying, but nevertheless, she delivers on the goods. She's got the goods, and she delivers. So diva behavior in people that don't have any talent is the only thing that's absolutely intolerable to me. So Buzz is a jerk. But they didn't put him on the mission because they wanted a guy who's fun to talk to. There is one moment in the movie, this is a small spoiler alert if you've gotten it already, but Neil's friend Elliot C. is killed in a crash. He's an astronaut who never got into space. He died in training. He's usually listed as one of the astronauts that died as an astronaut. Elliot C. and another guy were killed on a routine flight, and they just went into a mountain. And Neil is outside at this funeral, and Ed White comes out, and Ed White's not going to have a good end either. And Neil's out there looking like he's got like a camera, and he's trying to, like, he's filming the moon or something. He's looking at the moon. And Ed White comes out and starts, chatting him up, because Neil and Elliot C. were great friends. And in the movie, and I'm sure this happened in real life, Neil Armstrong turns to Ed White and he says, "Do you think that I came out here so that I could talk to somebody? Is that what you think? Do you think I left the party and came out here so I could talk about things?" And I didn't laugh. I just went, "Yep, got it. Got it." No, he didn't want to talk about these things. He's processing it. That's what men do. They go off and they process things, and they do what they have to do, and then they go back and go to work. And so there was that. So let me just compare this movie to two other movies. Excuse me. In First Man, I'm sorry, I didn't wrap up on Buzz. You don't have to like Buzz. Buzz was on the mission because Buzz was Dr. Rendezvous. Buzz Aldrin essentially worked out orbital mechanics in his head and understood on a visceral level what other people, including Neil, had to do intellectually. Buzz, by all accounts, Buzz understood orbital dynamics, understood the strange idea that if you've got something in front of you and you want to catch it, you have to slow down. And that's very hard to process. But if you've got something ahead of you and you shoot towards it, you're just going to get in a higher orbit, and the higher orbit's going to slow you down. If you want to catch something that's ahead of you, you have to slow down, move to an inner orbit, pass it, and then slowly accelerate again and match them. And Buzz did this in his head. It was Dr. Rendezvous. He's simply brilliant at it. And he's exactly the guy you want. You want a guy who's got the ability to visualize mathematics the way that Buzz Aldrin could. I think Buzz Aldrin could see math in a way that only real geniuses could have. Yes, and Eric's right again. You don't get that. You never get. He's just a jerk in the movie, and it's like, oh, poor Neil. Well, not so much poor Neil, because I don't give a damn about poor Neil. Poor Michael Collins. He's got to fly in this mission with this absolute loudmouth jerk Buzz Aldrin and this metallic robot Neil Armstrong, and it wasn't that way. You're right, Eric. You never get a chance to say see what Buzz brought to the mission. And what Buzz brought to the mission was Neil had a visceral understanding of the hardware and he was a good stick, he had tremendous flying skill and nerves of steel. But Buzz had the math and had the ability to visualize not only the orbital paths, but the flight paths. And Buzz was the ship's computer on the way down. They're just constantly, radar's failing. We got a 1202 alert. The only time you ever hear Neil Armstrong in real life sound annoyed, the only time I've ever heard him sound annoyed, is he's 55 seconds away from landing in this crater. And they've got their radar altimeter, which is telling them how high they are above the moon. And suddenly the thing just goes out. It's the first landing attempt. Boop, gone. 1202. No radar data. What's a 1202? NASA's working on it. They've never seen a 1202. They're trying to figure out what a 1202 is. And meanwhile, the Eagle is descending to the lunar surface, and these guys are getting closer, and they're down to 5, 6, 7% fuel, something like that. And Neil says, can we get an answer on this 1202, please? Something like that. And so they didn't have their radar. And the radar altimeter is a handy thing to have if you're going to land on an object that you've never landed on. It's useful, especially since you've got 10, 20 seconds of fuel, to know how high you are above the surface. Because there are no visual cues. You're not down there looking at cars. There's no shopping centers down there to tell you how high you are. You can just fly it in on eyeballs. You have nothing to judge the scale by. It's like landing on they say that when guys are landing seaplanes on a perfectly smooth lake, perfectly smooth glass lake, it's actually much more dangerous because they can't tell where the surface of the water is. They'll fly right into it because they can't really tell where it is. So Buzz had to be on that mission. I don't know what Michael Collins' particular contribution was. To be perfectly honest with you, I know Neil and Buzz a lot better than I know about Mike Collins. But these two guys were the best two guys we had. The Apollo 11 crew was the most qualified crew we had, and I think by a wide margin. So there's that. So anyway, enough of Buzz. Back to these two other movies. I want to compare First Man to Apollo 13 and to The Right Stuff. And I mentioned this real early. It's like, you're in The Right Stuff, and you've got these 7 guys who are arrogant, swaggering jerks by many people's accounts. And so how are you going to make a movie about guys like this? My favorite joke, which I try to tell every week if I can, what do pilots use for birth control? Their personalities. It's true. So when you see The Right Stuff, the two things that made a big impression on me, and I remember it very clear, it was 1984, was it? 83, something like that. And the first time you meet Alan Shepard, he's out at sea in a carrier, I guess it's Vietnam. Yeah. And they've gone to look for pilots, and that's Jeff Goldblum, wasn't it? I think. So you see these guys landing on the carrier, and then they got Shepard, and they're interviewing Shepard on the deck, and the two NASA guys are seasick and they're throwing up over the rails. And Shepard says something to the effect of, "I hear you guys have got something really dangerous." He said, "Yes, it's exceedingly dangerous." And he says, "Count me in instantly. It's going to be dangerous." Yes, he was landing a scooter. He was flying an A4 Skyhawk onto the deck. What do you know about this guy? Nothing, except for the fact he's got this big grin on his face. Is this going to be life-threatening, really, really dangerous? Yes. I'm in. Don't need to know anything else. If it's going to be dangerous and exciting, I'm in. Now you got the basics of Shepard. And then, of course, the classic is you got Gordon Cooper driving through the Mojave Desert in a red convertible. And you got that Dennis Quaid grin. And he's just driving along, and he's not a particularly good husband either. He's driving along, and he just turns to his wife and says, "Who's the best pilot you ever saw?" And she just smiles. And you love the guy. You just love him. He's all throughout the movie, he's like, "Who's the best pilot you ever saw?" And they make a joke of it, and they kind of close that joke out at the very end of the movie. It's delightful. It's delightful. So now you've met Gordon Cooper, and you like him. And there are little things to like about all of these guys. And you see John Glenn getting into an argument about one of the mission things, a personal item. I think it was with Shepard or with Grissom or something. You see Grissom and what he went through, the tortures he went through, and so on and so on and so on. And they're real people, and you care about them. And my favorite Glenn moment is when they're saying, well, I'm not going to do this. And he says, well, then I'm going to take you off a mission. I'm going to replace you with somebody else. And one of the guys says, well, who's going to fly it? Meaning all of them are backing up Glenn, and they're 7 brothers, and they're a unit, and they stick together. One of my favorite movie moments of all time, I mean this is probably one of my top 3 or 4 favorite movie moments ever, is in The Right Stuff, where we've basically seen most of the action already and seen what they've been through. And they have this giant barbecue in an indoor arena in Texas that Johnson is throwing. And you see all the uncouth people and the photographers, and all the astronauts are all straight-laced, and they're trying to be, good PR guys and stuff. And it's kind of a drag. And then they have the room kind of go to dark, and there's a couple of white-hot spotlights on stage, and this dancer named Sally Rand comes out and does this fan dance. And I think they're playing Claire de Lune. And the room becomes absolutely silent because she's doing this incredibly elegant dance. And, of course, it's all feathers, so it represents wings and flight and so on. They're intercutting this with, of course, didn't happen in real life, but artistically it's a very good thing. They're intercutting this big party for these successful astronauts with Chuck Yeager trying to make an altitude record in an F-104 and having to, crater the plane and bail out and barely survive. But that's not what's so great. So now all of a sudden you've got this room full of all these people, all these loud, boisterous people, and it's utterly silent. And you're watching this dancer. You can't even see her face really. And they're playing Claire de Lune, and it's just this very peaceful moment. And you see one of these guys, one of the 7, looks over at another one, catches his eye, and the other guy looks back at him. He catches his eye. And they're not making faces. They're just looking at each other. And then they look out at another guy, and he turns and looks at them. And the 7 of them form like these, it's like a spider web of like these silver threads that come out of them and connect them to each other, but to no one else. And in that moment, in that 30 seconds, you get the sense of how different these guys are from everybody else. They have the right stuff, but it's not a boasting kind of a thing. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. I was telling Scott about this. I think it was Scott, on the right angle, or Steve, and they nailed it. I never thought about it this way. I said these 7 guys they have something that nobody else has. And they said, yeah, and the filmmaker is so good that they make you feel like you've got it too. I thought, yeah, that's absolutely great. Yes. In that moment, you are the 8th astronaut. You're the 8th Mercury astronaut. There's 7 Mercury astronauts, but at that moment, in that barbecue, you're the 8th one. And you're sharing this with them. And it just makes me cry. It's just so beautiful. It's such a beautiful moment, and it's so underplayed, and it's not about anything other than just this love that these guys have for each other. This mutual admiration, respect, and love that they have for each other after what they've been through, and going to continue to go through. So, beautiful. So that's The Right Stuff, and The Right Stuff is essentially about 4 of the 7. You got Grissom, you got Glenn, you got Cooper, and you've got Shepard. A little less on Carpenter and Schirra and Cunningham. I think I got that right. Slayton, one of those. It doesn't belong there. And Deke Slayton does. But anyway, and then there's Apollo 13. So you've got Tom Hanks, who's just instantly lovable character, who's also playing Jim Lovell, who's, Lovell's a steely-eyed missile man, but Hanks isn't playing him like a robot. Hanks is playing him like a guy who's good at his job, and you can tell he's afraid, but he's too busy to be afraid. He's too busy to be afraid now, and you just love him, and it's my high privilege to have gotten to know Gary Sinise pretty well. And he's my favorite character in that movie. I was going to say by far, but Ed Harris is awful good, and the guys working on the electronics are good. But Sinise plays what's his name? Is it Schweikert? Apollo 13 was Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Schweikert, I think. Rusty Schweikert, I think, is a rookie. And it was supposed to have been Ken Mattingly. And he was supposed to be on the mission. It was supposed to be Mattingly, Lovell, and Hayes. And at the last minute, they say Mattingly has, we think he's got measles, so he's washed out of the flight at the last minute. I mean, the last minute. And he's just drunk and just depressed and all the rest of it. But then when there's an accident, Mattingly's the command module pilot, and, well, I think he's the command module pilot. In any event, Mattingly knows the systems, and Gary Sinise just knocks it out of the park. He just locks himself in the simulator. He says, I don't want anything in here that's not up there. I don't want any flashlights, don't want any food, don't want any water. I want the temperature in here to be the temperature that they got in the thing. And you just care about these people, and you like them. And I was mentioning, you see Patton, and Patton is a unpleasant guy. In real life, an unpleasant guy, and George C. Scott plays up the unpleasantness, and they're not running away from it, and they're not sugarcoating it. He's not a nice guy. But you watch Patton, and you come away loving him because they put the essence of what Patton was into that story, which was written by Francis Ford Coppola, if I remember correctly. Command module pilot on Apollo 18. Yeah. So he never got it was 18 or 16. He never got to fly, I don't think. No, he flew 16, right? Yeah, young Mattingly and Duke on Apollo 16. So you've got people that you care about, and Patton, back to Patton. You got George C. Scott gave you the essence of what this guy was, but you got the sense that this guy he's a man above history. He's Winston Churchill, and he's Neil Armstrong, and he's a person worthy of a biography film. Because while there's plenty not to like about Patton, there's plenty to love about Patton. And Dave Big Booty says I'd follow Patton into hell because he'd get me home. Yes, absolutely. And that speech at the beginning is based on a speech that Patton gave. Coppola punched it up quite a good deal. He cleaned it up and sharpened it up. But essentially it's what Patton said. And that whole first 5 minutes of Patton it's just magnificent. I'll never forget it, ever. I was young when I saw it. I was actually so young that I was actually giggling a little bit at some of the the bad words, but it was like it's just, we're going to grab him by the nose and we're going to kick him in the ass. We're going to beat the living hell out of them all the time. We are going to go through them like crap through a goose. And, and other classics, the classic being, I'd be proud to lead you fine men into battle any place and any time. And something to the effect of, when this is over, and you've got your grandson sitting on your knee and asking you what you did in the Great World War II, you won't have to tell him, well, son, I shoveled shit in Louisiana. How do you not like that guy? How do you not love that guy? He's ruthless, but he's a winner. And if you're going to risk your life and go to war, ultimately, I suspect this is certainly what I read and feel to be true, that soldiers obviously want to come home. They're not in any hurry to not come home. But they'd rather have a general that won rather than one that was overly solicitous about their welfare, like McClellan and so on. If we're going to fight, then let's fight and get it over with and go home. So let's just get this thing won. Yeah, that's Eric is that's the best line actually. No, I think it's like, no poor bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. You win a war by making the other poor bastard die for his country. And I thought, man, that's just fantastic. So anyway, yeah, it's great. And the supernatural quality they put in Patton too, that sense that, they're driving him out to, they're in Tunisia, I guess, and Battle of Kasserine Pass. They're driving out to the battlefield to see all the wreckage, and it's a catastrophe. And on the way out, he says, "Turn left here," and he says, "No, General, it's up the road." He says, "Don't I know where the battlefield is?" And he goes to this empty field, and he stands there on the site of Carthage, and he looks at this open field. And you can tell he can see Carthage. He can see the city. And he talks about the battle for Carthage in the Second Punic War, Third Punic War. And he closes by saying, "I was here." You believe him. You believe him. I believe him. And that gives Patton grandeur. And Neil Armstrong deserved better than what he got. Yeah, that'll do it, I think.